Good morning. My name is Michael Ludgrove, and you've heard my introduction. But basically, I'm here to talk about this book and how I came to meet Joshua. My father was a fellow student with Kenneth Anderson, Don's father, in Bishop Cotton's. And later, he went across India as a railway official, a civil engineer on the Indian Railways. So I was always interested in discovering what his early life was in Bangalore. And then among the photographs that I have of his are two reunion photographs from 1935 and 1936. And standing next to him is the individual identified to me as Kenneth Anderson, the great author, the Shikar author. So I thought if I knew something about Kenneth Anderson, it would tell me something about my father's social life in Bangalore. And of course, I got all the books, but there was nothing to do with my father, whose life took a completely different tangent. But anyway, so now we come to Kenneth's son, Don. This is a beautifully evocative book of a period of Bangalore that most people have no interest or no knowledge, no clue of. He was an odd character, as you know, if you've read the book. And he belonged to a certain section of the Anglo-Indian community, not representative of the whole of it, but certainly a part of it. And the book tells me more about Joshua's writing skills than it does of Don Anderson, the so-called last colonial hunter. Over to Joshua.
All right. Your questions to, you can ask me some questions and I can probably answer them.
Okay, so Joshua, what brought you to write about Don Anderson, not Kenneth Anderson?
So, Kenneth Anderson is known as the Jim Corbett of South India, and everyone knows Jim Corbett. So, although Kenneth was a Bangalorean, lived here from 1910 to 74, not many people know about him. And the first idea was to write a book about Kenneth himself, but considering that he'd passed away in 74 and I really didn't have any material to work with, I thought the next best thing would be to write about his son, because Don truly was one of those remnants of the British Raj who continued to stay on in India after independence, and what life was like for such an individual, right from 1934 to 2014. I thought that was an interesting topic, and that's why I wrote the book.
So what else would you like to say, Joshua?
Yeah.
Any questions from any of you at the moment? I don't think, no matter how loud we spoke, will we drown those people out? We'll try anyway. So, Joshua, what's the next question? Any questions? Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
That's correct.
And he was a sort of a hero. I don't know if this is on, but I'm just going to speak.
Yes.
He was sort of a hero, and probably, I haven't read the book that he's written. He was a hero in another way, in Harry Black and the Tiger. I don't know if many of you have seen this movie or heard of this movie. He's the double for Stuart Granger.
Right.
And he was a handsome, strapping guy that we used to see as kids in Richmond Town. And the last I met him was outside his home on Serpentine Street. And he thought, I came down specifically from Hong Kong to write about Richmond Town and my old hometown. And he thought I was there trying to broker his property. And he came out straight away and said, no, we're not selling this property. And I said, no, I haven't come here for that, Don. And he's an extremely nice guy. And I'm looking forward to reading your book.
All right. I can give you some insights into the movie itself. So in the 1950s, Stuart Granger was a big Hollywood star, and in 57 he had just acted in Bhavani Junction, which is written by John Masters, and suddenly India seemed to be a very lucrative option for Hollywood to actually produce films. And immediately the next year, MGM decided to shoot a film in India called Harry Black and the Tiger. This was produced by John Brabourne, the son-in-law of Lord Mountbatten. And the initial thoughts were to shoot it somewhere up in north, but then they decided Bangalore would be a better place to do this. Bandipur was ground zero for this, so everything was shot in Bandipur. And with a name like Harry Black and the Tiger, you'd have a tiger in it, and you'd have Stuart Granger fighting it or shooting it or something. So, but he was such a big star in Hollywood, nobody wanted to take a risk. So they wanted a body double for that, and Bangalore was the place that they looked for. And I don't think there were many choices in Bangalore those days other than Don Anderson to do this. So Don and stayed with the crew, and they stayed in Bandipur for a month and a half, and that's how they did this film.
Well, I could make a small sort of comment on this relating to the Anglo-Indians, not just Bangalore, but anywhere in India. Their culture was basically English, but they were also brought up on a diet of Hollywood films, not Bollywood, but Hollywood films, and cowboy films, westerns. And if you look at the cover of Joshua's book, he almost looks like Stuart Granger. He fancied himself a white hunter even then, you know, with his gun and his hat and his sleeves rolled up and looking pretty tough. So this was something quite common with Anglo-Indians, this Hollywood culture. Then the Beatles came later, but basically it was this Hollywood film thing. And Stuart Granger, of course, you know, was a great actor and all that, but Joshua will tell you about that.
Right. I'll add a little more about what this session is called Bygone Bangalore, and the idea of this was to give you a sense of what Bangalore was like, not in the 60s or 70s, as most people would remember, but actually from the 30s and 40s. And I'm guessing nobody from this crowd is actually that old. So to give you an idea, Bangalore was the first city in India to get electricity. And people actually set their time by when the electricity was switched off. It was switched off at 9 p.m. every night, and that's how they set their watches. You pretty much stayed close to school, but if you had an indulgent father like how Don had, you rode a pony to school or a cycle to school, which unimaginable nowadays. If you think of pets, what those people had in those days, it was not dogs or cats, but there were leopards and bears and hyenas and so on. That's what Donald Anderson, he had a menagerie at home of these exotic creatures. Ice cream was still available, but not in shops, but it was made at home with an ice cream maker. Lakeview was still around at that time, and for a few annas, I think that's what ice cream cost those days. Anything on the Bishop Cotton School you want to add on, Michael?
Well, I suppose this could be rather sensitive, but I don't think a lot of people know why Bishop Cotton established these schools. Not only here, but in other parts of India as well. And he established them specifically for the children of the English and Anglo-Indians as a tribute to the Anglo-Indian boys of La Martiniere College who had taken part in the defense of the residency in 1857. So you might look at Bishop Cotton in a different light from now on, but that is why Bishop Cotton's was established. My father passed through Bishop Cotton's, and later on, as I said, you know, he became an official on the civil engineer on the Indian Railways. And finally, in '66, he left India, '67, like a lot of other Anglo-Indians did, and moved to Australia. But he always spoke with affection about Bishop Cotton's, and I still have photographs of him playing cricket there, and his name as well as his brother's name is on the board of Bishop Cotton's. You can Google it, or you can go to Bishop Cotton's and see it yourself. So yeah, and you know, when I go to places like the Bangalore Club, almost everyone there seems to have studied at Bishop Cotton's. I'm a sort of honorary old boy, and I go to the Timaya lectures and all that when I'm in India. So it's one of the cornerstones, not only Bishop Cotton's, but a lot of Anglo-Indian schools, cornerstones of the Anglo-Indian culture. And one of the reasons a lot of Anglo-Indians left India in the late 60s was an attempt at that time to do away with English medium schools. If you may recall, it was Morarji Desai and people like that who wanted to do away with the English medium schools. And where would India be today? Where would the high-tech industry in India be today without English medium schools? Anyway, that's Bishop Cotton's.
So the term Anglo-Indian, Michael, is often misunderstood, right? And it's been used to describe different people at different points in time. Would you like to explain that?
Yes, you see, look, the Anglo-Indian question is a very complex one, and a lot of people think about it in very simplistic terms. Oh, it must be, half English and half Indian. It's nothing like that. In fact, the Portuguese were the first foreigners to come here and marry Indian women in the 15th century. And it was their descendants, mainly their female descendants, who began to marry the British who had arrived in Madras by then. And a lot of Anglo-Indian authors are pretty hysterical about this. The British began to produce Anglo-Indians deliberately, and they paid their mother a certain amount of money. Yes, they did. They paid the mothers, the Indian mothers of Anglo-Indian children, one golden pagoda, but this was because they wanted them to bring them up in the Anglican faith. If anyone ever does any research on the religious wars in England, you'll know what was happening in England in the early and mid 17th century, and that was the reason. Now, then apart from that, the South has always been a very cosmopolitan area compared to the North. And I grew up basically in the North, Jhansi, Agra and Delhi. And I can tell you, the people there are quite different to the people there. They're pretty aggressive, pretty nationalistic. And one of the reasons why a lot of Anglo-Indians left the North. Anyway, but coming back to the South is such a rich melting pot, not only of British and Portuguese and Dutch and Armenians and Parsis and Greeks and Indians who were so openly minded. And this may be controversial, but I think the Hindu religion in the South is a lot more inclusive than it is in the North. In the North, it's pretty ritualistic and pretty exclusive. Here, it's, live and let live, and it's quite different. It's an intellectual religion. And so it's able to cope and accept all these different ethnicities. Ask you more questions. What shall I ask you? Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Could you pass a mic, please?
Can we have a mic, please? Where's she gone?
Which year did your father graduate from Bishop Cotton's? Because my father graduated from Cotton's also.
Okay. I think he finished.
He was also on the cricket team.
Oh, was he? Well, my father was Donald Ludgrove and his brother was Charles Ludgrove. And I think they left in about 1926 or something like that, And in fact, if you have those books on Bishop Cotton's, Eton of the East and all that, there's a little photograph in the front of the scout troop. And my father's there sitting in the first row, and his brother, who was older than him, is at the back holding up the flag. So, yeah, that was the year in which they left. His brother left England left India in the 50s, and he passed away in England some years ago. And so did my father in Australia.
I had a question actually.
Yes.
So it's more about the book actually. Why do you think these colonial shikaris made such great raconteurs as well? I mean, they wrote books about their hunting days and their adventures. So Kenneth Anderson was also great, right? We of course up north we have Corbett. So what do you think is it sort of makes them write books and write such wonderfully?
I think first the experience itself, right? I don't think anybody today would have experiences like that. And secondly, not all of them wrote great books. I think Corbett and Anderson are exceptions. But if you read a lot of the stories or books that those people wrote, some of them are very almost to the point of being technical, saying, I went there, I did this and shot that. But can Corbett and Anderson stand out because they're actually able to bring Corbett and Anderson Can you increase the volume, the mic? Okay. So they were exceptions to the rule because a lot of them wrote about the experiences of hunting and stuff like that. But I think they stood out because of the way their writing style was, I think, very inclusive, and it brought the jungle into the reader's room. That's it.
I also think that these stories, these hunting stories, are quite common with a lot of Anglo-Indians who didn't write about it or didn't go, to the jungle and shoot animals. There was a sort of freedom of expression among the Anglo-Indians of that period anyway. I'm talking about the 40s and 50s and 60s. And you'd hear this in every family you went to. If you went and visited a family, they'd talk about, where they went shooting here, where they went shooting there, even if it's only small game. And also Anglo-Indians were prepared to travel, to move around outside the zone of comfort, where I don't think this was so common among other communities. But of course, yes, they were great writers. Some of them were great writers. Corbett was a great writer. And there are other great writers, not all Anglo-Indians, on hunting, particularly in Africa and America. Anyway, over to you, Joshua.
Yes.
Hi, Josh. I haven't read the book as yet, but I did present it to someone who really enjoyed it. I know this is your first book, and I'd love to know what were the challenges writing the book?
So, writing about hunting today is almost offensive. It's taboo, right? None of the publishers want to, sorry again. None of the publishers want to publish a book about a hunter, right? It's politically incorrect. There's so much awareness about hunting and how much destruction it brought upon. So nobody wanted to touch a book like that. And I think I made it worse by choosing a title called The Last White Hunter. So it actually never even went beyond the first stage. But those who did, they would read few chapters and say, it's a great book, but it's so niche. It's not something that we could publish. But I kept at it. I wasn't in any particular hurry. And I think up to 25 publishers, about 40 literary agents, and 7 years, here we are.
The attitude towards hunting and shikar, from the perspective of, say, Mysore Palace, there is a room full of hunting trophies, basically shot by Maharaja Jayachamraja Wadia, that is not open to the public for this very reason. It's a bit sensitive.
A tiger or a... Yes. Right.
Tigers, which is what many of the Kenneth Anderson books start with. Most of his stories start with where a village is terrorized by a man-eater or a black panther, for instance.
That's correct.
And he'd go after that. The villagers would help him do it.
So he had this informal network of these tribals in certain areas, and mind you, if there was a tiger that killed a person, this villager would have to go to the closest village, then send a telegram for Anderson to come, because that was the only mean of communication. There were no telephones, so telegram was the way that it reached at the Anderson residence, and then he would go out and hunt that creature.
I enjoyed the book very much.
Thank you.
One of the issues or the things that concerned me was this dramatic change of this hero to a maudlin, defeated old man. How did you, and you met him at that stage, right?
That's correct.
So, how did that hit you, and how were you able to reconstruct the hero of 30 years past or whatever?
So, you've read the book, so just for the rest of the audience, the first 8 chapters are written from Donald's perspectives, and those stories were gathered sitting with Don. Either I gathered them myself, or I actually paid students from Christ College to go sit with him with a recorder, gather those stories. They would send the stories to me, I would transcribe, and then, that the whole process went about. So what I knew was just the last 6 years of his life. And those 6 years he lived in penury. He didn't have any money. And to people who knew Don, they would be very surprised, because Don was a very good planner. Everything was planned in advance. if you were traveling with Don to the jungles, he would know which day you need to go, where you're going to stay, all that. So a common question was, how did Don not plan his life so well? And the answer is, as Don says, he never expected to live this long. He lived such a hedonistic lifestyle, hunting, having numerous girlfriends, and living life to the fullest. He actually thought he would die in his 40s or 50s. In fact, he hoped to die in the jungles under the foot of an elephant. That's what his dream was. But as he says, he didn't die, he just grew old. And he stopped working in 83. He used to work with Bygone Mills in Bangalore, and then he had no real income to speak of for the last 30 odd years. He just lived from handouts and from a few friends that look after him. Yes.
Okay, my question is basically for Michael. It is could be construed as sensitive. It isn't meant to be. I'm a senior journalist. I just want to know factually. I've had a lot. I'm not Anglo-Indian, but I've grown up in Calcutta and in Darjeeling, and I've had a lot to do with them. I grew up with some. Some of them are still very, very good friends of mine. I see a lot of interest in the Anglo-Indian community to know their roots. Okay. They want to know who their ancestors were, their roots, etc. But I see nothing of the Indian part of it. You know, there's and still to this day an inability to come to terms with the Indian part. And I want to know from, since you speak of perspectives, whether it was a little different here in Bangalore. Am I seeing only what I see in, in what was Calcutta and in Darjeeling in those days? Or what is it?
It was the same everywhere, wherever there were Anglo-Indians. I mean, the harsh truth is that they never felt Indian at any stage. They never had any Indian culture. They always felt that their culture was threatened by the communities outside. And as I say, I mean, in my own family's case, my grandfather, my father's father, was a British soldier who, his term of engagement came up in Bangalore, and he decided to live here. And he joined the railways, and my father was born here. His mother was Scottish. And so it's easier for me to say that they never felt Indian in any way. My father was born in 1914, and as I say, he left, it was 1967. And he had a lot of experience in North India, which wasn't very pleasant. But to my knowledge, in my experience, in my opinion, they never felt Indian in any way. There are now groups, who are very proud to be Indian and all that. But I tend to think that these may be people who couldn't get away. And now, if you even look at their culture, the ladies dress in very Indian fashion, because if they didn't, it would draw attention to them. And so they still hang on to that old English culture, although they've never been to England or Australia or anywhere else. But that is the harsh fact. Never felt Indian in any way. As I say, their culture was Hollywood, and that was it. And the stories of relatives who happened to be in England or Australia or anywhere else. But that is it. That's why it never happened. I mean, Anglo-Indians, there are lots of academics who write about the so-called history of the community. But these tend to be academics who only write for other academics. There is no general, easily readable history of the community. I mean, Frank Anthony's book was the last one that tried something like that, and that was in 1967. But after that, nothing. No interest. And most Anglo-Indians left most of them went to England. A few of them went to Australia in the 60s when the White Australia policy was changing to become more inclusive. But those who could get away did so.
So we have two generations of hunters, as I understand, and the son ends up in poverty, but the father's like a successful writer.
That's right.
I mean, so he's something of a movie star. I mean, and they're carrying out this kind of glamorous life replete with hunting and traveling and girlfriends and so forth. Okay, what's the economic base of that? I mean, how did they afford the rifles and the travel and You know, and I mean, was it sport or was it a profession? And if it was a profession of sport, where was the payoff there?
So I'll first explain the father's case. So the father used to work for he used to work for the telegraph office here in Bangalore, and that was his job. Hunting was a hobby for him, and he mostly hunted man-eaters. It was never for the sport or to make money out of it. His son, on the other hand, was also employed. He used to work for an organization called Binny Mills, but he hunted for sport, and I think he profited from skins and things like that. But the father, I think, lived in better circumstances because apart from having a job, he also wrote these 8 books, which were a huge success all over the world, translated in at least 20 languages, about 6 Indian languages, and I think 14 or 15 languages all over the world. So that's where the income came from. And Don, till 82, he had a source of income, plus he did hunting for sport, but then he stopped working in 82, and that's when the downfall began.